So why in the world do I love these so much? When I tell someone that I collect watches, I typically get the same look that's given when a toddler is trying to tell you a story. The polite, well, isn't that special look, combined with a restrained, I really don't understand look. I do every so often get the, why would you pay that much for a watch when you can get something that tells time for $10? And if you're one of those people, I kindly ask you to get on your Peloton to blow off some steam, take a relaxing drive in that Tesla, have a bite of that $100 cheese in your fridge, then tidy up with that Dyson vacuum, and stop judging me. It's been my experience that nearly everyone has at least one thing that they care about more than most, and want to pay for the best that they can afford. But why male models? I mean, why watches for that one thing? It's a valid question that I couldn't even answer myself for a while, and the answers have definitely evolved over time. But I'll give it a shot, and I'll start with how I first got hooked, which was the moment someone showed me the back of a watch. Before that moment, I had no idea that there were even watches that did not run on batteries, much less about the engineering and craftsmanship applied to high-end watches. But once I understood that a watch was a collection of tiny mechanical parts carefully put together to work in unison to tell time, I was in. I never got into cars or robots that much as a kid, so I guess this was my chance to geek out. And geek out I did. This is me taking a class offered by the Horological Society of New York in various cities across the country, where you go through disassembling and reassembling a watch movement. I thought I looked pretty cool in this picture, which was taken right before I caused a near microscopic part to fly across the room, causing Morgan King of Talking Watches fame to get on his hands and knees to help me find it. I wish I were kidding. Anyway, it was pretty satisfying to go from this to this. And it took all day, and it took so much concentration. And it was probably the simplest of watch movements. And I seriously doubt mine was anywhere near accurate. So that experience forever gave me the utmost appreciation for even standard movements that can keep good time. And then I found out that keeping time is not all that watches do. It's hard to remember now with mobile phones, smartwatches, or even with a Casio or Timex, that there was a time when immediately knowing the time of day was not so simple. But what about other things related to time that we now take for granted? How about knowing what date it is, accounting for months without 31 days, and leap years? Or when the sun is setting? Or when there's a full moon? Or timing something critical, like someone's pulse? Or even something simple like, I need an alarm to wake me up. Or, it's dark and I can't see what time it is. Long before the luxury of electricity, many of these problems were already solved by brilliant watchmakers, with watches that had many more parts than this. And much like your first struggles to hit a golf ball even 100 yards, makes you deeply respect pros that can do this. Knowing firsthand how hard it is to make this makes me deeply respect someone that can make this, and start to understand what you're paying for. By the way, the accuracy of some of these mechanical watches is astounding. For example, for this watch, the phase of the moon will be off by 1 day after 2.06 million years. I guess that will do. And for those that hold firmly that your phone is more reliable, you're correct right now, but when the zombie apocalypse comes, and you can't find a charger, and my watch is off by 2 seconds a day, let's talk again. And the ingenuity doesn't just stop with the movement. It also applies to the case. The innovation used to protect the movement when you're actually wearing a watch in everyday life is also fascinating to me, like how they learned to make it waterproof or unaffected by magnetism. And that innovation can have impact far beyond watches. There are brands out there making whole new materials, like Ceratanium, an alloy that's light as a feather and unbreakable. It was recently announced that one of the greatest living watchmakers, Roger Smith, will be working with the Manchester Metropolitan University to experiment with applying nanotechnology to reduce friction instead of using oil. You think that doesn't have other implications? Okay, maybe I'm getting a little bit too nerdy here, and you're more of a right side of the brain kind of person. Well, there's a lot for you too. The concept of time is a very human thing, and highly personal. With that in mind, consider the beauty of the idea that for a mechanical watch, time is powered by you, either by your motion or by you connecting with it each and every day. And as I've seen more watches, it's amazing to me just how many expressions of time there can be, and how each one can strike a different emotion or be a statement of who you are, from elegant simplicity to pure craziness and rebellion, from silly to serious, from being a dreamer of what's below to a dreamer of what's above. To build something that can keep time is great engineering, but when you can also do that, and to pick something like an impulsive man versus a patient woman when it comes to love, by having one arrive every hour versus every 12, or allow someone to suspend time so that they can stay in the moment, it becomes art that is personal and can take you to another place. Like, say, another era. Another reason I love watches, especially vintage ones, is not only do they tell time, but they can mark time and remind us of history. There aren't many things that can be used for an entire generation and still be in working condition to be used by the next, but watches can and have been. I'm a very big proponent of using watches to mark special moments in one's own life, but I also feel that the connection with watches and moments in overall history is undeniable. The whole reason there are wristwatches in the first place is because the first people to ever take flight did not want to look down at a pocket watch when they were figuring out how long they would be in the air. And since then, there's been a link to watch innovation and people trying to figure out just how far they could fly. But on top of that, watches can also take us to something we may have forgotten in history, like how Pan Am pilots were once the coolest people on Earth, or that Abercrombie & Fitch used to be meant for adventurers instead of for whatever this is. I think it's great that long after people like Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, and Jackie Kennedy are gone, there'll be something tangible to give others a sense of who they were. Which brings me to the biggest reason why watches are a passion for me. They connect people. This watch was gifted to me last Christmas from my mother-in-law, and it's a 1950s Jaeger-LeCoultre Memovox. I really hope I pronounced that right. The watch belonged to her uncle, Chester Reuter, or Uncle Chet. Originally on a Speidel bracelet to fit Uncle Chet, I bought a small size, era-appropriate leather strap so that both my wife and I could wear it. Uncle Chet passed away in the 90s, so I unfortunately never had a chance to meet him. But I did have the pleasure of knowing his wife, Irene Reuter, or who, like so many others, I called Aunt Irene, even before I was technically part of the family. She lived to be 104 years old, and had her charm and wits about her until the very end. The very first conversation I had with Aunt Irene, she mentioned that seeing me with her grandniece, my future wife, reminded her of herself with Chet, and I could tell just from the way she smiled when she mentioned his name that they really loved each other. Aunt Irene passed away in late 2017, and as my mother-in-law handled her estate, I was honored to be the person that she thought of in her family that would appreciate Uncle Chet's watch and take care of it. I guess me talking about watches all the time to everyone, non-stop, made a good case for that. And even though I never met Uncle Chet, Through this watch, I think I have a good idea of the kind of person he was. Thoughtful, a businessman, someone that took good care of things, and someone that wanted to commemorate a growing success in his career. And also, someone that valued being punctual. Obviously, there's marriage and kids to connect me to my wife's family, but my mother-in-law entrusting me to take care of this watch, a tangible memory of her uncle, now gives me an even stronger connection to that side of the family, for which I'll forever be grateful. And looking down at it will always remind me of that first conversation with Aunt Irene, and of a young couple that stayed in love forever. At a watch event a couple weeks ago, someone happened to have nearly the same watch from the same era, and even on the same strap. And you can imagine the conversation that started and stories that followed. It will never cease to amaze me, no matter where you are and who you're talking to, how watches can somehow connect and find a common ground. I hope you now understand a little better why collecting watches for me went from a hobby to a passion. If you're willing to share, I'd also love to know why you collect watches, or even why you collect something else. Feel free to reach out or include it as a comment below.